so grateful and so privileged to be able to learn from someone who has done so much throughout his lifetime and continues to inspire people throughout this country. Please help me welcome my good friend, Reverend James Lawson.
Well, now, sisters and brothers, I cannot live up to that introduction. I'm not even going to try to. Kent and I have been good friends for a long time now, and we've worked together on many fronts. And I am very pleased to have been invited to be here this morning. I'm not sure where to begin at all. But so much can be said and needs to be said. This gathering to take a look at right to work laws and the whole necessity of organized working people in local organizations in which they can help set the agenda for themselves, for their work, for their play, for their politics is more than critical. I am convinced now that we can never have democracy in the United States without economic justice, economic equality. And we can never have economic justice if we do not have working families organized in concrete unions that have their interest at the first level, as Kent has said, that are justice unions, not business unions, not craft unions, but unions that are concerned for the whole person in the whole community and all facets of it. I know full well that the weakness of the democratic experiment in the United States has not only been racism, not only been sexism, not only been violence, but the weakness of democracy in the United States has primarily been economic exploitation in our country from the very beginning of this experiment on these shores. The lack of economic justice is a critical issue for the nation as it is today. So, and I do not take this position because of the lack of understanding. I've been led in this position because the biblical Hebrew Bible, Christian Bibles, both push economic justice. Jesus insisted that the laborer must have his or her wages. The Hebrew Bible pushes the notion that when you keep wages from the working people, you in fact commit murder against the working people. That's in a very big book called Sirach, Jesus of Sirach, a teacher who lived in the Palestinian area today more than 180 years before Jesus of Nazareth. So that evidence in the scriptures is overwhelming that economic justice must roll like mighty waters. Justice that is economic, that is social, that is gender, is critical for any organizing effort in the world. So I've been convinced of that all of my life and continue to be convinced of it. There is a connection between the movement of which I was a part between 1958 and 74, the movement in the southeastern part of our country, and the labor struggle and the struggle for economic justice. I tend not to like the way the media and we in the community talk about the civil rights movement, because I think it inadequately persuades what, inadequately portrays what we have been about, what we were about then. I speak therefore mostly of the Rosa Parks, Martin King dimension of the movement, which was not the same as what went on in the NAACP or in the Urban League. It was not the same as what went on in the Conference of Catholic Bishops. It was rooted in direct action, organizing and mobilizing the people to be like athletes in the city by their bodies, by the strength of their bodies and the strength of their minds, going into the fields of the enemy and there demonstrating for the change that we want. That's a very different way from the work of, let's say, Muhammad Ali, which I consider a mark and a dimension of the civil rights movement, or the change of desegregation of schools in the United States and education. And it's very different from the legal strategy to get the Constitution cleaned up so that we get major decisions out of the Supreme Court that reverse the decisions of over 150 years of the Supreme Court that went against inclusion of all the people of the land. You may or may not know that the first presidential election, only 7% of the people could vote. Think of Alabama on Tuesday. Only 7% of the people could vote in the first presidential election. The vote has never been a universal idea of the USA democracy. It still is not a universal idea. But there's a difference between the politics of voting and the politics of nonviolent action. The politics of voting is an essential ingredient of any kind of democratic process. But it does not work if you do not have the power of the politics of direct action, nonviolent direct action. It was the labor movement of the 20th century, as has already been said, that began the process of eradicating poverty and economic injustice in the country and allowing a middle class to emerge. So my thesis is that if we are to stop the rapaciousness of plantation capitalism in the United States, which is what we mostly have, the tyranny of the economic order, we must move towards organizing at every level of our lives. We must help working families to wake up to the fact that their strength is in community together, building a family of workers and family of organizations that will represent their total human interest. So I push from the politics of nonviolent direct action because it is that wing of the civil rights movement that put the issue on the tables of many, many people. It aroused the imagination of the black community, as that consciousness has never been aroused before, since. It helped us to mobilize in many ways, in place after place, in ways that began the desegregation process in our country, which is not complete, but has to be renewed and continued if it's to reach 75% to 80%, which must be our goal, if not 100%. So I would like to just say 2 or 3 things about that, and make some remarks about it. I haven't been briefed on my time, so someone will have to tell me.
You got 6 minutes.
Okay. All right. One, in this video, a major target of this video must be the rising of people power that challenges the Chamber of Commerce of the United States and of Los Angeles. The analysis leaves out a major opponent and the major agency in our country that has critically pushed against the unionization of our nation. It has pushed against the desegregation of our nation. It has pushed against gender equality in our nation. When in the 60s, for an illustration, we had major legislation in Congress on behalf of all the people of this land. For an example, the Voting Rights Bill, or the Civil Rights Bill of '64, or the bill to create Head Start, or the Medicaid bill. These were bills that all came out of our struggle, that we supported, that we had lobbyists on behalf of, that we had, in fact, a few very excellent congresspeople who were pushing them on our behalf. The Chamber of Commerce never supported a single one of them. You better understand that. Go back and check out my remark. They never supported a single measure that our movement supported at the legislative level. The AFL-CIO supported and lobbied for every one of those measures. It was the only national agency besides the National Council of Churches and the National Conference of Catholic Bishops who supported the legislation of the 60s that have made this moment possible today in 2017. In 1970, a corporate lawyer by the name of Lewis Powell wrote a memo to the Chamber of Commerce and said to the Chamber of Commerce that capitalism in the United States was under attack. The free market was under attack, and that the Chamber of Commerce had better do something to stop the progress of the control of the economy moving into democratic forms rather than into big business. Lewis Powell was then, a few months later, appointed to the Supreme Court by President Nixon. The Chamber of Commerce took that memo from Lewis Powell, who was a big lawyer for the tobacco companies, a corporate lawyer, and appointed him to the Supreme Court. The Chamber took that memo and called some 40 to 50 CEOs of the largest companies in the United States, including Bank of America, Exxon, GE, and many other Wall Street firms as well. They formed that into a national task force who researched and developed the counterattack to stop the growth of legislation in the country that would see to it that our economy became a fair economy for all people, that would dismantle the old ways of work in the economy and lift up the ordinary person to a new level of dignity and hope. Now, check this story out if you want, because we need in the activism community to know that the major opponent of every democratic move and struggle in this nation is indeed what I call, not free market, I call it plantation capitalism. Because it's on the side of wealth gathering. Worse than that, it's on the side of reducing working people of all kinds in every dimension of public life and private life. It wants to reduce human beings to being property and commodities and robots
in the society,